Hey class, welcome back. Interpersonal communications. Going to start off, going to jump right into it. We're going to finish up today with chapter 9. Then we're going to move on to chapter 10. The last thing we needed to cover in chapter 9 was outlining. Okay, I'm not going to go over a whole lot about why you need to, about how to outline, because you've all taken English and you should all remember that. Okay? But outlining in a speech, the primary reason we do it is to visualize the speech, okay? It allows you to actually see, instead of just keeping your head, it allows you to physically see and be able to judge the content, okay? It allows you to test the scope of the content, all right? It allows you to test the logical relationships. Of the content. Do your arguments flow? Are you progressing chronologically through part of it and then spatially through the rest? Okay? It allows you to test your supporting data. Do you have sources to cite in the first point but none in the second or third? Is your evidence appropriate for what you're doing? Okay? And then it will assist in developing your notes. All right? So those are, broken down and focused. Oh, it allows you to test the balance of the speech. Balance and proportionality. So in other words, if your outline is 3 pages long and the first 2 pages are nothing but point 1, and then your second and third main point are crammed into the top half of your third page, then you have a proportionality and balance problem. Okay? So we do outlining to visualize our speech, test the scope of the speech, look for logical relationships and ensure they're appropriate, look at our supporting data and make sure our evidence is evenly spaced. Then it helps us develop our notes, and it allows us to check and make sure the balance and proportionality of our arguments are evenly done. Okay? So that's the last on chapter 9. I was going to go into a lot more detail on outlining, but finally I just decided we didn't need it. Let's just get focused. Okay, so let's move on. We're not skipping anything. Let's move on to chapter 10, delivery of the speech. Okay, first thing we're going to talk about. All right, what I call performance apprehension. Your textbook calls it communication apprehension, which is probably just as effective and just as appropriate. Now, what I do not call it is stage fright. I am not going to call it stage fright because, number one, performance apprehension can happen anywhere. Now, a lot of public communication events that we don't think about. When I say public speaking, a lot of times we think of a very formal situation where there's a speaker standing up in front of an audience, and that audience is relatively silent, and only through feedback, in a lot of cases that's nonverbal, do we even have that dialogue with our audience and that interpersonal communication that we've been talking about. There's a lot of performances and communication events that are actually public speaking events that we don't normally think about. Biggest one that you probably dealt with before is a job interview. Okay, job interviews are a situation where you would have performance apprehension or communication apprehension. You are literally going in and sitting down and being asked to give a series of impromptu speeches. And we're going to talk about that impromptu speaking in just a minute. When you go in to complain to a retailer and say, hey, I want a refund on this product, that is a public communication event, okay? Anytime you're talking to someone and you're standing there and you are advancing an idea or advancing a proposition and someone else is reviewing it or spectating on it, that is a public communication event, okay? So there's hundreds. The PA announcer at a football game, that's a public communication event. Reading the lesson or reading the scripture or whatever holy book you have in your house of worship, that's a public communication event. all of these things are public communication events where you can feel performance apprehension, communication apprehension, but there's no stage involved, okay? So number one, communication apprehension and performance apprehension can happen a lot in areas that aren't quote-unquote formal public speaking events. Number two, let's talk about the word fright. Fright, if you look it up in the dictionary, has something to do with physical harm or death. You're not going to die, okay? You know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid of bears. Bears will kill me. I've seen a bear up close in the wild before where if the bear wanted to, the bear could have eaten me, and it did not. I am very fortunate, okay? But I don't fear standing in front, there's no harm going to come to you. There's nothing that's going to be happen to you. Also, fright is a negative word, okay? Apprehension, not so much. Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Drew Brees, they all feel apprehension before an athletic event. For them, it's great. E.R. Robinson, who was did a ton of research, did a lot of the basic research on communication back in the 60s, said the complete absence of feelings of apprehension is neither normal nor desirable, okay? You need to feel a little keyed up. So let's talk about it. So first of all, I'm going to be honest with you, okay? There's no cheats, there's no hacks. Performance apprehension is just something you deal with, all right? Number two, people who suffer extreme performance apprehension do not have some sort of mental illness, okay? Number three, people who suffer extreme performance apprehension are not necessarily going to be bad speakers. In fact, right now, in my 4 sections of SBC 205 public speaking, my 3 best speakers all came to me and complained about having extreme performance apprehension. And 3 of those 4 are my top speakers all said they had extreme performance apprehension. Number 4, don't think that memorizing is going to get you past performance apprehension. In fact, memorizing is probably going to make it worse. Because in my experience, when someone memorizes their speech, they get up in front of the audience, they start speaking. If they stumble over the memorization, that's going to magnify the performance apprehension they're feeling. Okay? 5, your performance apprehension is not going to be externalized. All right? In almost every case, the performance apprehension you're feeling and you're experiencing, and I'm not going to run through the entire laundry list. Usually in my public speaking classes, we list every possible symptom, and usually there's as many as 15 or 20, from butterflies, sweaty palms, shortness of breath, shaky knees, the whole gambit. Chances are the people in your audience, even if it's a job interview, are not going to notice it. And even if they do notice it, they're not going to interpret it negatively. Okay? Last thing about performance apprehension, okay? Before we jump into really causes and ways to deal with it. There was a survey done one time where 62% of people thought they experienced more performance apprehension than average. I want you to think about that statistic for a second. Over 60% thought they were above average. Mathematically, that can't be true, okay? We all feel that we've got the worst many of us feel that we have the worst performance apprehension in the world. And when I started public speaking a long time ago, I felt I had it worse than anybody, okay? But that's just something that we all work through. So let's talk about the causes. There are 3 basic causes. First, there's the biological cause, okay? You've probably heard of fight or flight. Well, it's actually fight, flight, freeze. What your body, we as humans evolved when we were not the top of the food chain. There were saber-toothed tigers roaming around out there. There was the woolly mammoth. There was wolves. There was any number of other animals that would eat us if we were not prepared to run, okay, fight, or stand very still. Everybody's seen that scene in Jurassic Park where the T-Rex comes up and he's going like, if you don't move, they won't see you. I don't believe that, but anyway, just stand stark still. What happens is we dump a ton of adrenaline into our system. Our livers dump a ton of sugar into our systems. Our heart rate elevates. Everything goes up, including our mental capacity. Now, the average person can speak about 120 words a minute and can process about 400 words a minute. So you've already got 280 words to play with. Suddenly you dump all that adrenaline, all that sugar, that 400 can go up to like 550, 600. So you're now dealing with over 300 words a minute where you can sit there and obsess on what everything else is doing. Here's the thing that you need to remember about the biological causes. Your body can't sustain that for very long, okay? Usually 2 to 3 minutes. And all that adrenaline, without additional input, without additional stressors, your body will begin to burn through all that sugar and all that adrenaline at about the 2 to 3 minute mark, okay? So here's the, if you want a hack, if you want a performance apprehension hack, it's that if you stick with it for 3 minutes, it'll begin to dissipate, okay? So the first cause is biological. The second cause is previous experience. Now, if I could go out and I could shake every middle school English teacher in the United States, I would go, "What are you thinking?" Okay? And here's why. We would never imagine that we would take a middle school kid when your self-confidence is at its worst, you're completely reforming your self-image, and let's face it, middle school kids are just jerks. They are. We all know that. So we take this and we would never say, "Hey, little Susie, come here for a second. Little Bobby, come here. We know you two have never played clarinet before, but here you go. Take these clarinets and go up there and play a duet for us." We would never imagine doing that. But would we grab some kid who's 12 years old in a 6th or 7th grade English class and say, "It's now time for you to do an oral book report"? We give them no training on public speaking. We don't give them a whole lot of time to prepare. We just throw them into it, okay? Church I went to down in Tampa, Florida. My youngest daughter, I think, was about 13 at the time. They had forgot to schedule anyone to read the lesson that day. So they said, "Hey, let's have one of our Utes do it." And so they walked up to me and they walked up to my daughter and they said, "Would you like to read the scripture lesson for today?" And I just went, "She's not going to do that." And they looked at me like I had gone insane. And they went, "Well, why not?" And I said, "Well, you haven't given her a chance to prepare. You're going to say, 'Here, read these verses from the Bible that you've never seen before in front of a large group of people.'" Now, most of us would just go ahead and do it. Okay, most kids would just go ahead and do it. And that kind of horrible experience is something we can carry with us for a very long time. Okay? And it's just that here, everybody can speak, so everybody can do public speaking. Okay? That's not how it works. So in addition to biological and previous experience, there's lack of training. Okay? There's lack of training. All right, by lack of training, we just mean not everybody has the requirement within their primary education up through high school to do anything to get any sort of public training, public speaking skills or training or anything like that. Okay, lack of training, lack of skills. Okay. So as we prepare for speeches and as we begin to understand performance apprehension, we begin to sort of build in and sort of learn that performance apprehension, communication apprehension is just something we can deal with, okay? And the more training and the more skills we develop, it's not that we don't feel performance apprehension, it's we're better able to cope with it, okay? So let's talk about some coping mechanisms. These are not hacks. This is not going to get rid of performance apprehension. You don't want to get rid of performance apprehension. Remember what E.R. Robinson said. It's not desirable. So first of all, develop a communication versus performance mentality. Right? If you think of every public speech you give, every public communication event you're involved in, is an opportunity for you to communicate with a group of people. We communicate with people all the time. We constantly talk to people. We are in dialogue all day, every day, via email, via text, Skype, face-to-face, telephonically. We are in communication with people all the time. So standing up in front of people just changes the number of people you're communicating at any given time. So think of it as a communication. Try some relaxation exercises. Okay, and that does not mean, 12-ounce curls are not a relaxation exercise. Alcohol and controlled substances, never a good idea about dealing with performance apprehension. Okay, it's just going to lead to woe and worry. It's not going to work. By relaxation exercises, I was trained a long time ago, back when I was dealing in a very stressful environment. My employer had some psychologists come in and teach us some self-relaxation techniques. One of them was a self-hypnosis technique where you start at the tip of your toes and you work all the way up your legs, relaxing every muscle group. Then you work, then you start at the tip of your fingers. Then you start at the base of your torso and you relax everything all the way up to the top of your head. It takes about 20 minutes. But it's a great relaxation technique. It's a form of meditation. It's a form of self-hypnosis, but it works really well. Okay? Then is what we said just a moment ago. Get training. Now, there's a lot of places, if you haven't taken public speaking, take a public speaking course. If you are you're not going to go back to school, you're going to get this done, and you're never going to set foot on a college campus, there are groups out there like Toastmasters that give you an opportunity to speak. The Rotary Club, the Lions, all sorts of them sponsor opportunities for you to speak. Volunteer with any social organization or any organization if they need a speaker, volunteer and get that experience and do that training. Okay? So that's performance apprehension and communication apprehension. We do not call it stage fright. Okay? And also we do not believe in alcohol or controlled substances as being a way to deal with performance apprehension. It's not going to stand you well if you go into a job interview smelling of bourbon, and when they look at you and ask you about it, and you say, "Oh, I get really nervous in interviews." You're not going to get that job. Okay. The next step is we now have to decide on how we're going to present whatever our speech. So we're going to talk about 4 methods of presentation. Okay, 4 methods of presentations. The first one is reading from a manuscript. Now, reading from a manuscript is where you have the entire speech written out. I have done it many, many times. I spent, like I said, as I've told you before, I spent 25 plus years in the Department of Defense, and almost all the time when we had congressmen, cabinet officials, senior Department of Defense officials coming through, the wording we used had to be very specific. So we would, the staff would put together a script. We would get it approved by all the people that needed it to be approved. And, especially at times when we're like briefing foreign officials. I mean, you're standing there representing the government of the United States, and what you're going to say is going to be taken as the position of the government of the United States. So a lot of senior people had to sign off on those, and you didn't get to play around with the words. You had to read exactly word for word what was written. A couple of things to remember, and that's a perfectly valid thing to do, okay? A couple of things to remember here, okay? You're still communicating with someone, okay? And we've all seen people who have gotten up there and said, "Today the weather will be clearing in the morning, followed by overcast in the afternoon. Highs will be in the mid-70s. Lows this evening will be in the 60s. Expect some more additional rain tomorrow." I mean, and it's horrible. Okay? So even though you're reading the manuscript from a script and every word has already been selected for you, you still need to be looking and communicating, and you need to be in a dialogue with the audience. So even if you didn't write the script, you still need to be acting. First of all, try not to put the death grip on the lectern. Okay, just Communicate, talk, have a conversation still. Today, weather, we can expect clearing in the morning, although a return to overcast by nightfall. There will be additional rain after midnight. Highs today will be in the high 70s, lows will be in the low 60s. You're still looking up and making eye contact. Just because you're reading a manuscript doesn't give you an excuse to ignore the audience. That's going to be an ineffective public speech. Okay? Very close to manuscript is memorization. Memorization. And that's where you've got a manuscript, but you memorize it word for word so you don't have to bring it up here. Memorization is good if you have to concentrate on the exact words. The problem with memorization is the human memory is not perfect. Okay? And there's also, and you'll see it all the time, if you've got a manuscript and you sort of get lost, you can sort of shuffle the pages around. But if you have a memorized script stuck in your head and you lose part of it, and I have seen this so many times in a public speaking class where somebody will get up and they'll be saying, now, the fourth most important thing you need to remember about the fish kill-offs in Lake Okeechobee in Florida, and somebody will walk by the back window, or there'll be a bang or something that will distract them, and they'll suddenly sit there and you'll see them stop, and you'll see them get wide-eyed and sort of go, the first most important thing you need to remember, the most important thing, the fourth the most important, they have to go back. We don't memorize a long string of words. Human memory works where we remember certain signposts or little flag posts. We remember it in chunks. So if you get interrupted in the middle of a chunk, you have to go back to the beginning of that chunk, okay? And you have to start over, okay? And that doesn't look good, all right? So be aware, memorization does give you the precision of a manuscript while still allowing you to look up and engage with the audience, okay? But there's no flexibility. You can't change the words in order to adjust to your audience, okay? And also, if you forget, you could be kind of screwed, okay? Next is impromptu. Now, an impromptu speech is where you don't get you get very little advance notice, and you're not given the opportunity to prepare a full speech, okay? An impromptu speech, the most common place people come into contact with an impromptu speech is a job interview, okay? That is nothing but a series of impromptu speeches. Hey, tell us about your work ethic, okay? That's a public communication event. That's a public speech. It's just you're not standing up and you've only got an audience of 4 people, okay? Or maybe even 1 person. But it's still a public speech. When your boss looks at you and says, hey, you're my safety expert, give us a 5-minute talk on the safety issues associated with this piece of machinery, okay? A couple of tips when it comes down to impromptu. Number 1, stall for time, okay? Get your thoughts together. Don't start talking immediately. Say, okay, I can certainly do that. How much time did you say I had? Well, you've got 5 minutes. Okay, great, 5 minutes. I can do that. Okay, how's everybody doing today? As everybody knows, the boss just asked me to do a 5-minute speech presentation on safety issues associated with, you've just bought yourself 45 seconds, okay? Hey, I want to thank Bob for giving me the opportunity to give this speech to you today, okay? I've done that I don't know how many times, all right, where I'm sitting in a room and I'm considered the subject matter expert, and the boss would wheel over to me and say, hey, Vic, you're the smartest guy in the room on this. Why don't you tell everybody what we need to know about it? And I would stand up and I would say, first off, sir, thank you for the opportunity to help train people on this very technical area, okay? And everybody needs to remember that we are going to be governed by the appropriate rules and regulations and laws of the United States while we're talking. And I would give, I had sort of a hip pocket, 30 to 45 seconds of stuff that I would just be able to put it bluntly, BS with, so that I could give myself a time to think, to sort of answer the boss's question. Now remember, you speak at 120, your brain processes at 400, That gives you 280 words a minute to sort of filter and organize your thoughts, okay? So while it's impromptu, it's not unorganized. It has an introduction. It should have a statement of purpose. It should have some preview of your main points. It should then give you the main points and then give you a conclusion. All right, the last method of presentation is the most confused, it's the most misunderstood, I think, but yet the best. Extemporaneous. Extemporaneous speaking is where you have some notes, but the language you pick is left to when you're actually giving the speech. So you have notes that are just memory markers of key points you need to hit, but overall, the exact words you pick on the day are going to be done in the room where you're giving the speech. Now, a lot of people think, oh, that's stupid. Why would you ever do that? Okay? Because it allows you to be flexible. If you look over and you see half the people in your audience are all sitting there going, what? Okay? If you've memorized, if you have a manuscript, you have no flexibility. You can't go back. You can't shift. You can't change. An extemporaneous speech allows you to go, okay, I see some people here aren't understanding this as well as I'd like for them to. Let me drop back a little bit and re-engage, and let's see if we can knock this down. Or if you see people going like, got that. Or if they're looking a little bored because they're sitting there going, yeah, I know. Okay, then you can, okay, seems like everybody's getting this part. Would anybody mind if I go ahead and skip to the next part? Okay, so that works out. It gives you the flexibility. Now, because you don't write the speech out, people have the impression that extemporaneous speaking takes less preparation than manuscript and memorization. It's the exact opposite is true, because you have to get what you want to say down, and you don't have and you don't write it out word for word. You have to really know what you're going to be talking about. You have to really have everything planned out really well. So extemporaneous speaking, much more flexible, allows for much better engagement with the audience. Okay, but what it does do, it requires more practice and for you to be more familiar with it. Okay, so those are our 4 methods of presentation: reading from a manuscript, memorization, impromptu speaking, and extemporaneous speaking. Now, let's put you in front of the audience. Okay? Talk about how you're going to deliver the speech. 3 basic rules for nonverbal delivery. Number 1, be animated. And by animated, I don't mean cartoonish, I mean be lifelike. Act like you've got some energy. Act like you're alive. Everybody has had an instructor or a teacher that will go, the Boxer Rebellion began in China when the imperial forces from Europe had overtaken the drug... Okay, and you're just like going, oh, please kill me. I can't stand this anymore. Okay? Be animated. Have some energy. Show that you're alive. Okay? Number 2, be conversational. Worst thing in my public speaking classes, and I tell them not to do it all the time, is do not write out your speech and then tape it to your note cards, because that's not conversational. I mean, think about it. When was the last time you said furthermore in conversation? The only time you say furthermore is when you're in a fight with your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other, and furthermore, you haven't cleaned out the sink in 3, that's when we do that. We don't say furthermore in normal conversation, but when you write, in fact, one of the things I do is there's 12 key differences between oral and written communication. Okay, shorter sentences, fewer words, fewer syllables in the words you do use. Okay, we don't construct sentences with 6 dependent clauses like we do when we're writing. So be conversational, relax. Don't try to artificially elevate your language. Last thing. Act like you care. Do you have to care? No! But you need to act like you care. Okay? You need to act like it's important to you to be there. Because if it's not important for you to be there, it won't be important for your audience to be there. I've done many job interviews where we were hiring people, and people would come in and go, tell me about your work ethic. I don't know. Like to work, I guess. Yeah. Now, that's clearly somebody who doesn't care. If you don't care, you're not getting hired. All right? So in any public communication environment, always act like you care. Next important thing about nonverbal delivery, okay? We need to distinguish between verbal and vocal. All right? Because a lot of people think that the voice is part of verbal delivery. Verbal only has to do with the words you choose. And we're going to sort of bridge that gap right now by talking about speaking for clarity. All right? Speaking for clarity. But verbal is the words, vocal is how you deliver those words. And in some areas when we're talking about clarity, it's going to be both verbal and vocal. All right? First thing is you need to be aware of articulation and how you articulate. All right, the last time I was in Afghanistan, I had a Romanian captain that worked for me. He sat next to me. He spoke pretty good English, but he was not, clearly Romanian was his primary language. And articulation has to do with the clarity of the sounds you speak. And so one of my guys that worked for me, an American, came up and said, G? And I said, nah. You? Said, gotta go. G? Nah, you? Gotta go. Did you eat? No. You? I'm going to go. Okay? So we had this conversation, and basically what was this person was coming up to me and telling me he was going to lunch, and he was asking me if I wanted to go with him. And I sat there and I said, he goes, G? No, you? Gonna go. Okay. Later. And he walked off, and my Romanian captain looks at me and goes, Victor, what did you just say? And he just said, well, I said, what do you mean? He said, that was a conversation without words. And I went, no. He asked me if I'd been to lunch, and I said no. And he said, well, he was going to, this guy just lost his mind. Okay? The problem is when we get into public communication situations, we fall into these same inarticulate voice patterns. Okay? I'm going to do something, not I'm going to do something. All right? So articulation has to do with the way we use our larynx, okay? Our soft palate, our hard palate, our tongue, our teeth, and our lips to form the sounds that we use to construct words, okay? We need to make sure that we articulate clearly when we're in a public communication event, okay? Second after articulation is pronunciation. They're very closely related. Articulation is clarity of sounds. Pronunciation is clarity of words through the proper pronunciation of them. Now, I'm not trying to tell you your regional dialect is bad, okay? What I'm trying to tell you is you are going to be judged by the way you speak. And if you're trying to move into a professional environment where they need someone who is going to have extreme clarity of communication, vocal and verbal communication, how you say words is going to be important and may determine whether or not you get that job. Okay? Well, there is a standard, unfortunately, online now. If you have any question about how you pronounce a word, you can go to dictionary.com and click on the little speaker device, and it will pronounce the word for you. Okay? I had a guy in a speech a couple of years ago that wanted to talk about a meme that he'd gotten emailed, and he kept talking about a meme that was mailed to him, and it just drove the class nuts. And as soon as he sat down, 4 or 5 people turned around and said, they're called memes. Okay? So you need to make sure that you're pronouncing the words correctly. The next thing after articulation and pronunciation is fluency. Do you have a good control of the language? Do you have good control of the words you're using? Are you speaking smoothly? Are the words flowing? Now, if you're doing it in a foreign language and you're doing it in a language that isn't your primary language, fluency is always going to be difficult, okay? But even if you are, especially if you're doing it in your native language, fluency comes with practice, okay? So if you're going to get up and try to give a public speech in front of somebody, especially if you're reading a manuscript and you've never practiced it out loud by saying the words and getting that muscle memory again associated with your larynx, your soft palate, your hard palate, your tongue, your teeth, and your lips. If you're not going to get that muscle memory and learning those words, you're going to wind up having problems. Okay? Then after fluency, finally, it's called I call it a vocalized pause. Okay? Your textbook calls it vocal fillers. You may also hear them called vocal crutches. I have vocal crutches. All right. Questions? Okay. I say that all the time. It's not as bad on these tapes for you guys, I think, but for my classroom classes, I do it constantly. All right. Let's move on. Okay. I say that all the time. When you're in a public communication event, we have a tendency to think that pausing is bad. We don't want to leave any silence out there. For some reason, we think that communicates lack of preparedness. So when someone says, tell me about your work ethic, we'll go, well, when it comes to work ethic, I think and we just immediately start talking, okay? The other way we do it is ending or beginning every sentence with or okay, or okay. A lot of times you will hear people go, well, I think when I'm talking about my work ethic, okay, that's just something you need to train yourself to listen for. A lot of times people will tell me, well, that's just the way I talk. Public speaking is not talking in front of people. It's public speaking. It's more formal. People will assess and give you credibility based on the deliberateness of the words you use and the fluency you use, okay? So when somebody looks at you and says, hey, so tell us about your work ethic. What you do is, tell us about your work ethic. I think it's very important. That pause does not make you look stupid. That pause makes you look thoughtful, okay? And slow your vocal rate down a bit. We're going to talk about rate and all that in just a second. But if you start talking like this, well, you're going to catch up that 120 toward that 400 words we've been talking about. If you slow your vocal rate down a little bit, and at the end of each sentence and clause, pause to take a breath, then you will be able to keep your thoughts organized. And people are not going to think that that's all that unusual, as opposed to you going, well, I don't know, Any questions on that? Send me an email. We'll talk about it. I did that. I said send me an email, so I didn't say okay again, because I'm saying that a lot these days. Okay. Woo. All right, so let's talk about vocal issues. All right, there's 4 aspects to the voice that you need to be aware of. The voice. Pitch. Rate. Volume. Now let's go with 3. There's a 4th one that's really old school. It's called quality. But nobody really looks at quality anymore. Quality is the way your voice sounds to other people. Now, you probably know this already, but because sound travels faster through solid objects than it does through air, you actually get your voice, you hear your voice out of phase, because when it comes through your larynx, it radiates up through your jawbone into your ear. So it's phased a little differently than what people are hearing out there in the audience. But let's skip quality and just focus on pitch, rate, and volume. So pitch is the tone. high or low, based on whether or not your larynx are very loose and you can talk very quietly, very low, or whether or not they're very tight. That's exactly what that does to me. Rate is measured in words per minute, and volume is just loudness. Pitch is tone, rate is words per minute, and volume is just simply loudness. Okay? Here's what you need to remember. Variety is the key. Because if I got up here and spoke in the same rate, tone, and volume throughout an entire lecture, you would probably be asleep and would never make it to the end of an hour-long lecture on videotape. You would simply shut off YouTube, or you would start playing a game on your phone, and then you would no longer be listening to the lecture or get any information that I have to provide you. Okay? So the key for all of these is variety. Okay? And you don't always have to get loud or fast or raise your tone to get attention, because a lot of times we'll be talking along, and when we get to something really important, we'll talk slower and a little quieter, forcing people to pay attention. And when they notice that change, when they notice that I'm talking differently, they're going to realize at a nonverbal level that I'm doing something different, and they need to pay attention to it. Okay? So that's the voice. Pitch, rate, and volume. The key thing about the voice is you need vocal variety. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the key things of the kinesics of it, body movement, okay? And this will be where we wind up. First of all, eye contact. You need to appear to make eye contact. Do not do the thing where you look up at the ceiling. Do not do the thing where you look down at the floor or you stare at your nose. You want to look right at people's foreheads. That's a great place to look, okay? Make sure your eye contact is relaxed, it's casual. Appear to make eye contact with the entire room, okay? Do not focus on one person. Do not focus on one side of the room, okay? So there's eye contact. Remember, with eye contact, you don't have to make eye contact. You have to appear to make eye contact. Okay, I've changed the camera placement a little bit today, so you're not going to be able to see this all the way. Okay, posture. Back straight, head up, shoulders squared to the audience, feet shoulder width apart, okay? This is a stand of someone who is not nervous about anything, okay? I am, not in a defensive posture. I want you to think of a boxer. One leg back, one leg up, okay? Hands are in front of the chest to protect the chest, or up high to protect the head. This is a defensive position. Okay? If you're in a defensive position, side is turned so the blows come into the shoulder, okay? When you're standing like this giving a speech, people think you're scared to death of them, and they don't listen to you, okay? So you will stand, you should stand, feet shoulder width apart. Even if you're behind the lectern, feet shoulder width apart, hands separated, gesturing to the outside, head up, making eye contact, shoulder square to your audience. Now, if your audience is around, fine. Take a look around. Don't be afraid to shuffle and make engagement with the entire audience. Okay? What you don't want to do is clinch. You don't want to put your hands together. You don't want to put your hands behind your back, because we know what that means. That means you're getting perp walked. Okay? You want to keep your hands flexible and moving. Every gesture should be intentional. Every movement should be intentional. Okay? If you're going to move around, don't pace. This gives you the appearance that you're scared to stand still because you might get shot by somebody. Okay? Stop. If you have a main point, hey, listen, my second main point today is going to be that fertilizer is killing the fish in Lake Okeechobee. Okay? Hands are moving apart separately. If you want to put a hand in a pocket, that's fine. Never put two hands in a pocket. That makes you look like you don't care. One hand out and gesturing. The other hand is in a pocket. That's fine. Bring it out for big gestures when you really need to be big. Okay? All right. Last thing, again, that last thing on kinesics, all movement should be motivated. It should be intentional. All movement should be motivated. They should be intentional. All movement should be motivated. They should be intentional. That is incredibly important. Okay, last thing, visual aids. I don't normally talk much about visual aids in talking about public speaking. Why? Because if you can't give a basic speech, visual aids not going to help. Okay? If you can give a basic speech, you don't need visual aids. But a couple of things, the main thing I need you to do is to make sure of two things when it comes to visual aids. Number one, do not let your speech become your visual aids. If you can't give your speech without your visual aids, you need to rework your speech. I have seen a million times somebody goes up and goes, okay, today I've got 42 PowerPoint slides to go through and the projector has died, so I'm not going to be able to talk to you. Everybody, good night. And they leave because they are so tied, and their visual aids have everything. The visual aids are their speech. Okay? So number one, never let your visual aids become your speech. Always be able to do your speech without your visual aids. Okay? Second of all, never, ever talk to your visual aids. Turn your back. Talk to the visual aids. Your visual aids are just that. They're the aid. They're not the focus. You are the focus. So when you punch up your next PowerPoint slide, you can glance at it to make sure it's the right slide. It's a good pause for transition. You look at it, you turn back to the group, you start talking again. Okay? But you don't ever, ever talk to the visual aids. So two things about visual aids. Number one, never let your visual aids become your speech. Be able to do your speech without your visual aids. Number two, never make the visual aids your audience. Don't talk to the visual aids, talk to the audience. Okay. That's it for presenting your speech. Okay? We will move on to chapter 11 next week. I am going to get this posted, and we will see you around. Don't forget to email if you need me.